Well, good afternoon. My name is Greg Phipps, and I'm your primary host with RMLD's Current Insights. Today, I'm joined by Lydia. She's part of the RMLD team, and she's going to be prompting. We're going to have a discussion relative to some topics that are near and dear to her and me, for that matter. But as you guys know, the intention of our podcast is to let you, our customers, and those interested, what crazy things we're doing at RMLD. We'll talk a little about our core mission, but as you guys all know, for those of you who have heard this podcast before, our mission is really simple. It's about reliable, low-cost, non-carbon energy delivered to our customers in Wilmington, North Reading, Reading, and Linfield Center. For those of you who are curious about numbers, that's about 32,000 meters, but when we talk about people, it's roughly about 80,000 people that we serve that both live and work in the RMLD territory north of Greater Boston. Lydia, welcome. Glad you're here. I'll kind of turn it over to you just to say hello, introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll kind of jump into this topic.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. Like Greg said, I'm Lydia Lestage. I work at RMLD. I'm in the operations department and very invested in reliable, low-cost, non-carbon energy and making it happen for our customers. So let's talk about territory and generation.
Yeah, let's talk about
what is it?
Yeah,
and
generation.
And let us know why it's so important.
Yeah, so I'll we're going to play around with some graphics here. But again, as Lydia mentioned, mission's real simple: reliable, keep the lights on,
right.
Low cost, make the bills affordable, and non-carbon. That's the metric that we in Massachusetts have for our MLPs, municipal light plants. We are very supportive of electrification and decarbonization.
Indeed.
We need to do it in a way that hits all three of those: reliable, low-cost, non-carbon. So for those of you that are listening, you got to remember those key points. So I'm not going to walk through every slide here, but I'm going to a couple of key points in terms of why it's important. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So why is in-territory important? As part of the 2021 climate bill, which was enacted by both the state and the House in Massachusetts back in 2021, March of 2021, it had three key factors. One of them was the motivation to electrify the transportation network. We are not in the car business, but we do supply electricity that powers electric vehicles. Exactly right. So the state's working on that side of the equation. That's part of electrification, so we are very supportive of that, and we are ready.
Indeed.
The next piece would be air source heat pumps, or the building envelope. We kind of get involved in the building envelope with a combination of weatherization programs, insulation, air sealing, but also air source heat pump programs. So our previous sessions, we've talked a lot about air source heat pumps. So those are two mechanisms that the state has enacted as of that 2021 climate bill that are driving the load of each customer higher and higher. Now, electrification is basically the replacement of gasoline in the case of vehicles with electricity, and in the case of heating homes, it would be electricity replacing either natural gas or oil. So net, the amount of energy is going to depend upon the individual behaviors of the individual home or the business, but electricity is basically replacing either ultimately natural gas or oil from a heating perspective, and ultimately gasoline. So that's how it all comes into play. So we look at that and say, okay, what's going to happen to us at RMLD? And this curve we have here is basically our load curve, and we have come out of a decade of basically flat growth. There was inherent growth and some population growth and new businesses. At the same time, there were a lot of energy efficiency programs in place that was occurring from 2010 to roughly 2020. And Lydia, at that point in time, probably the biggest one is lighting. So I know you remember when compact fluorescents were very common, and then it was LEDs.
But LEDs today, was very big.
LEDs was very big, right? So incandescents are out. And back when incandescents were big, 2010, the EAI, which is the National Government Energy Association, basically indicated that lighting took about 28% of a total household load. Today, with most houses being either LED or compact fluorescent, lighting is somewhere in the range of 7 to 8%. So massive shift down. Not a lot of opportunities for that to reduce in terms of energy efficiency. The opportunities, air sealing and weatherization are examples, but no massive 20% chunks you can just take out of it. So we're back into this load growth, and we expect, due to electrification, our load to basically double, 2x, by the time we get to 2050. So that basically sets the stage for, okay, how do we serve that load? And back when we started, when RMLD started in 1894, by the time we got to 1896, we had actually built Station 1. Station 1 was a electric generation plant. It ran until 1924 when the load far exceeded the capabilities. And so since then, we've been out of the generation business. But we're going to get back into the generation business. And in another session, we'll talk about all the factors that are driving that, but primarily to support load and also generating inside of our territory at this point is actually very economical relative to buying only on the wholesale power. So that's the big need and driver behind us looking at in-territory generation. It's more economical. It also increases our reliability. And of course, we need to do it in a way that's non-carbon. Pretty fascinating.
It is.
Yeah. So did you, shall we jump into carbon capture?
Yeah.
Let me just, one quick, before we jump into that, let me just, we continue to look at a lot of different ways to generate electricity, both outside of the wholesale market with long-term contracts and also within our territory. We have roughly 10 megawatts of solar in our territory right now. We think, and solar is great, but it takes a lot of land area. And as you know, there's not a lot of land available in our territory.
Yes, unfortunately not.
So we'll do as much as we can, but we'll probably get to 40 megawatts. So what else can we do? So we'll do as much solar as we can.
Yes.
Check that box.
Yes.
Yep. We're going to look at wind, but realistically in our territory, there will not be any wind towers, realistically. So we'll do as much. We already have it in our portfolio. We'll continue to add it to our portfolio. We'll do some of the offshore, onshore, but inside of our territory, wind probably won't fit because it's the tall towers really don't fit. There's no area with which to put them. We have a very strong hydro dams, hydroelectricity portfolio. But in our territory, there's no raging rivers, no dams. Right. So while we like it, that's not really an option.
Right.
There's a lot of interest in nuclear power. There's two major facilities that continue to operate in New England. One is Seabrook, and the other one is Millstone in Connecticut, Seabrook in New Hampshire. We buy power for both of those. We've been buying power since they were both commissioned 80s and early 90s. But there probably will not be any nuclear reactors inside of our territory. So while it's part of the portfolio, not in territory.
Not in territory, right.
We're going to do some exploration with hydrogen, but it's still very early in the game, and that might work in territory, but probably a decade from now. We talked a little about solar. We're particularly interested in low-temperature geothermal. People think about geothermal as geothermal heat pump systems as opposed to air source heat pump systems to heat homes. Good technology. We think that there's a huge opportunity, probably in 10 years, to use geothermal to generate electricity, which is the business that we're in. But between now and then, what do we do? And so,
what are our options? And that brings us into our next category.
Exactly right, Lydia. That brings us into our next option, which is carbon capture fuel cells. So
now let's talk a little bit about that. But why don't you explain a little bit about what carbon captured fuel cell is and why it's needed? I'm
glad you asked that question. So the need, I think, goes back to us having the desire to generate inside of our territory, right? And there's economic reasons to do that and reliability reasons. We need a technology, as you just noted a moment ago, to do something now, right? Because our load is, it's 2024. We're almost halfway through this first decade.
There, right?
We're getting there quickly,
right?
Just for our listeners, and I know you've written some of the press work on this, but we are at 55. So the the target that was put into the 2021 climate bill was for us to be 50% of our power to be generated, 50% of the power that we sold to be generated by non-carbon sources by 2030. We're currently at 55% in 2024, so we're well ahead of the curve.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's great teamwork
Great
by the
work.
whole team. Exactly right. Exactly right. But as we get into carbon capture fuel cells, fuel cells is a technology that's been around for more than 2 decades. It actually started as a part of a space program 30 years ago. But it is a well-established technology. It primarily uses hydrogen. It doesn't combust, but it reacts with hydrogen to generate electricity and water. But there's not a lot of hydrogen available, so the common fuel source for fuel cells is natural gas. Now, natural gas is a fossil fuel, but we'll talk in a minute. I know you'll ask me a few questions on carbon capture, but our intention basically is to use that well-established technology to provide in-territory generation, and that's going to be good for economic reasons, and it's going to be good for reliability reasons. So let me kind of anticipate the next questions you're going to ask about the carbon capture. So fuel cells don't combust natural gas. There's a reaction inside these fuel cells. It is a well-established, proven technology. But out of it comes electricity, which we want because we're supplying our customers with electricity. Also comes out of it is water. That's a byproduct, which we can find a use for.
Right.
And then CO2.
The carbon.
So the CO2, the carbon. So our intention is to actually capture that and actually, well, you'll ask me a little bit later on what we're going to do with it, but the goal is to capture that technology, and our intention is to capture that CO2 to the extent that if we were to, so the technology right now will capture somewhere between 90 and 95% of the CO2 produced, which is pretty good. And if we put the system in place, would be displacing wholesale power. So we always want to compare it to wholesale power.
Right.
If we did it, our total CO2 footprint would be, if we put this carbon capture fuel cell in place, will be 40% less during the 15 years that we run this system. We're envisioning this being a bridge technology, but it'll be a significant reduction, and we'll probably emit. It won't be it's not zero, but it'll be less than 10% of what we would normally buy. So reduction of 90%, we kind of think that's a good thing.
Yes, it's a great thing.
So that's so we're going to capture that CO2.
And now once you capture that CO2, what are you going to do with it?
What are we going to do with it? So right now, CO2 is primarily so it's actually imported into New England. There's a well-established business. 70% of it goes into the food and beverage business. The most obvious thing is soda,
yeah.
right? That's but we're probably not going to put it into that's. So while that's a big piece of it, that's not where we're going to use it. Another place that it goes into, it's actually CO2 is actually part of the growth medium for the pharmaceutical industries, which are very prevalent in the greater Boston area. So we think that that's one area that's actually particularly well suited for CO2. Well, it's already using CO2. And then the other one is in the building trade, and particularly the concrete. Now, we happen to have a couple of concrete companies, building material companies in our territory. Right. So we're going to create this microcosm business where all of the outputs, the CO2 as well as the water, and of course the electricity, all has a home. One of the interesting things about CO2 in New England is actually imported into the region from Canada, Pennsylvania, Virginia, either on trucks or on rail. So it's kind of interesting that if we can generate it inside of our territory, we will basically be displacing the fuel and the CO2 that's emitted to either by rail or by truck, get that CO2 into our territory. Right. So there's a use for CO2, and not all CO2 is bad. Mm-hmm. You want to use it for a useful purpose, and so we're going to capture it, as you mentioned, but also use it for a useful purpose. The other interesting piece about that is, one man's rags is another man's riches, or one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yes.
We're going to take that CO2 and actually turn it into a revenue stream, which will help reduce the cost of the energy produced, And at the end of the day, since we are here to serve our customers in our territory, we will that'll help dampen the upward pressure on prices. Good question. What are we going to do with that CO2? So hopefully that answers people's questions.
Yes. And then when you actually capture the carbon, where do you put it? Where do you store it? How do you keep it safe so it's not,
Well, yeah. So the good thing about CO2, it's not combustible. But I think how do you keep it captured? So there's carbon capture. There's a variety of different techniques associated with the ability to capture carbon from a variety of different processes. We're trying to work with some technologies that are the process is well established, but they're going to be scaled to our size of the operation. It'll be captured on site, which will be in our territory, and it will be actually put into storage tanks. Just think of storage tanks as being roughly 10 to 15-foot tubes that are 50 to 70 feet long, maybe vertical. The longer ones will be horizontal, but they'll basically be on site. So it's not propane, but think of a large propane tank that you might see in somebody's house. And then once a week, we'd actually have a truck come through and basically empty the tank into a truck and then take it to either Cambridge or Somerville or maybe potentially locally. We might be interested in doing pipeline work, but pipeline is a whole different world. So I think initially we'll just do a single truck once a week to take it to its new home and be used. And of course, it'll be a revenue stream for us as well. Yeah. Pretty fun stuff.
Yeah.
We're thinking out of the box.
Yeah. You have to be forward thinking about this. And it's happening quick. So we have to always come up with great ideas. That being said, do you think carbon capture technologies will eventually be as prevalent as solar panels?
Yeah, kind of interesting question. The process is pretty well established, and even like solar panels, like the concept of using sunlight to generate electricity went back to the 60s. I mean, a long time ago. They didn't really become economic, on a wide scale economically viable until 2000, between 2000 and 2010. So there's a concern on a worldwide basis for CO2, so that technology has now gained lots of investment.
Right.
And there's cost curves and technology curves and efficiency curves, which is very typical with all technologies. Yes, I think that it will become more affordable, more efficient, more effective. The technology that we are employing is not brand new. It's a pretty established process, which is great. And so really the novelty of the system that we're trying to put in place is bolting together literally the fuel cell with the carbon capture technology. Fuel cell technology, well established, low technical risk. Carbon capture process technology, pretty well established. Scaling it to our size. But the novelty of what we're doing is putting those two together. We're not the very first, but we'll be the first handful or the first dozen or so, which is reflective of, as you know, what we do at RMLD, trying to innovate, think out of the box,
right.
But do it in a way that is managing risk, which is the whole idea behind our portfolio.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating little business, this CO2 space.
Do you see any other challenges on or limitations implementing this stuff? And
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, probably the biggest. Good question. So trying to manage risk. So we look at the financial side of the equation. There's not a lot of financial risk. It's a significant investment.
It's good.
Yeah, RMLD has no debt on its book. We don't want to take debt for debt's sake. But if we can make that investment to own the technology to reduce our cost structure and specifically our power supply costs, we should do it. So financial looks good. Technology is the other box that we look at. As I mentioned before, there's a risk in terms of putting these two pieces of technology together, but we're not the very first people to do this.
Right.
I think technically the technical risk is relatively low.
Good.
There's probably the biggest risk factor is availability of fuel. And as we talked about, these systems have the ability to take hydrogen today. And if we put hydrogen in it, we wouldn't even need the carbon capture technology. We've set up the business model so that we minimize the risk in terms of those two pieces of equipment, but we want to own as much of the assets as we can for economic reasons, but also put risk where people can handle more risk. But the last on that fuel side, but for the near term, the fuel source is going to be natural gas. And there's an intent, at least in Massachusetts, to reduce the use of fossil fuels, including natural gas. I don't think realistically, all of us in the industry, while we can see mechanisms in place to reduce the amount of natural gas that's used either for heating homes or for industrial processes or for electricity generation. And by the way, about half of the electricity generated in our region is generated by natural gas. That'll probably over the next 25 years drop down to 15%, 1.5. So from 55% to 15%, something's got to replace that. At the same time, load's increasing. So it's not going to go away completely. But right now in the winter time, there is a shortage of natural gas coming into the territory because there's a limitation in two primary pipelines that have limited capacity. We think that peak is going, that demand side of the pool of that natural gas will probably peak in 2030, 2031, 2032, and then start falling off. We are in a position where we can secure firm supply so that we always have it, probably 11 out of the 12 months of the year, which makes the economics work. So I think from the big picture perspective, fuel is a risk, but I think we have a way to manage that risk. And we won't formally go forward with the project until we have that figured out. But that's part of the work we're working on right now. So fuel's probably the biggest risk, but it's a good question. What are the risk factors? So financial, low risk. Technology, low risk. Fuel, moderate risk. We got to work on that. And then, of course, there's public opinion, which we care about a lot, external opinion. Again, we are trying to be as responsible as we possibly can. But remember our mission, keep the lights on, reliable.
Reliable, low cost, non-carbon.
Exactly right. So people want the lights on. And we want to do that in a way. And we look at all of our portfolio is an excellent example of a mix of wind and hydro, solar. Nuclear, and some natural gas on the wholesale side as well. So, but in this particular case, natural gas has a very small carbon footprint. So that's why we think this is pretty cool.
Which is great.
I think it's pretty exciting.
Yes, exciting times.
It is.
So
I think so. Any other crazy questions? Lydia, I think it's kind of interesting just to give people just a simple snapshot in terms of what we're trying to do. We're trying to think out of the box. But,
What are some of the ways that you think RMLD are going to start educating our customers on these new technologies and getting them to get on board with the shift towards?
I think as you pointed out, there's a massive amount of education that's required because it's not business as usual.
Right.
We are in the middle of a massive. We talk about seismic change, and that's real. It's a real seismic change.
But it's a great opportunity to educate.
It's a good opportunity to educate. So. We're educating people. Our reliability is particularly good. The lights are usually on, and if they're off for a short period of time, it's a short period of time. It's not hours. It's not days. There's always exceptions, but we have a very reliable network. So for the most people just assume that the lights are always come on, and our rates are literally they're very, very affordable. So people don't really pay a lot of attention because it works, then it's affordable. And we want to keep it that way. But I think going back to your question, there's the education in terms of the things we're trying to do behind the scenes to make it work. We've tried a lot of different communications vehicles. We're going to continue. We're more than a couple handfuls of sessions into our podcast program, and so this is one mechanism that we're going to use, trying to make this more efficient. We have webinars that we do on a quarterly basis. We have our newsletter. We do regular press release type stuff as well. Our website's pretty good.
We're visible in some of the town fairs and town days, so we're out there, and the customers really love us because we're so reliable, and
Yep, we do a
so
good job.
those are great events that we try to educate the kids and bring them up and give them pamphlets and get the whole family involved in educating.
It's
So
true.
yeah,
And we're increasing our social media presence. So
yes,
again, I think as you pointed out, be as in many places as we can.
Yes.
The core message is real straightforward.
Yeah.
How we do it is, obviously, you and I and the rest of the team at RMLD, we are deep into it every day.
Right.
We love this stuff. It's a privilege for us to be at RMLD. It really is. And, we want our customers to be well taken care of, and that's who we're here to serve. But I think at the end of the day, just, allowing them to the extent they want to get into as much detail as they want to. There's material on the website, newsletters, all sorts of stuff. And heck, call. We have a customer service team. You can email the customer service team. You can call the customer service team. You can just come. You can knock on our front door.
Knock on our door. We're always happy to help.
Right.
Happy to help our customers. So,
Lydia, I want to say thanks very much. This was a good session.
Yeah.
And hopefully our audience, those of you out there in the audience, learned a few things about how we're thinking about in-territory generation. Right. And that's going to be a wrap for another session of our RMLD Insights. And Lydia, I want to thank you very much for being part of our team.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
This was fun.
Yes.
And we want our customers to, and those watching this podcast, so we're going to try and do some work with graphics. So
yes.
Hopefully this will work out and we'll continue to make this program terrific. So we just want to say thank you.
Thank you, guys.